Hello and welcome to August's video podcast, which I'm trying to keep this video pod about practical subjects to do with orgonomy. And hopefully it's working this time. Third time lucky. My dog's got fed up with me messing around trying to get this. Me and videos don't get on that well sometimes. So hopefully this one's working all right, touch wood. And we shall start. Right. So I've had to restart the computer, so I'll have to bring up this Word document again. Um, so I'm going to read to you from my overview of biophysical research. This is in my Substack. If you look through the archive, and I'm going to read to you from the beginning of the second overview number 2, which is about ORACs, which is Reich's abbreviation, ORAC. And that was Reich's, he loved abbreviations. And that was his abbreviation for orgone accumulators, OR and AC for accumulators. So, Reich had discovered that the radiation from a specific type of bion sample, the bions are vesicles that are halfway between non-living and living things, and they're about the size of a bunch of exosomes or viral in brackets. So I'll start again. Reich had discovered that the radiation from a specific type of bion sample had a strong effect upon his body. This is in Norway. After some years of studying the bions, and just before the outbreak of World War II, whilst living in Oslo, Reich made a startling discovery. He found that a biological radiation was coming from a new type of bion. Well, he didn't know it was biological at first. Actually, he would have, because it was coming from a biological looking sample. These were the accidentally produced ocean sand large packet bions, termed Sapper bions. An assistant had done the bion process with sand instead of earth. Previously, Reich had been working with earth, coke dust, and various organic and inorganic compounds in creating the proto-living vesicles known as bions. So Reich had initially looked at emotions when he was running Freud's first clinic in Vienna, and then he looked at bioelectricity, then the orgasm function and pulsation, and that led him to looking at microbiology to look at pulsation and where organisms gain their energy from. And so he first looked at food and other compounds under very, very high microscopic magnifications, higher than most laboratories would have used at the time. Reich consistently had laboratories which were way above what was normal in his period. He was doing slow motion microbiology movies back in the 1930s. And his bion labs in Norway were pretty advanced as well. The radiation from the Sapper bions hurt his eye on the microscope, and magnetized metal articles in his lab, and this couldn't be explained conventionally. Though a curious physicist from Holland, Dr. Bonn, had asked Reich the year before if bions might indeed have a radiation. He did try and speak to a couple of physicists, and they couldn't really help him out. Reich tried to find an explanation for this new phenomena from the physicists he contacted, but they couldn't help him. One physicist used an electroscope with the bion samples, and finding no reaction, declared that no radiation was present. Reich was not convinced, of course. Realizing he was on his own and trying to isolate this radiation, he further found that the energy seemingly was everywhere, not just in the bions. It could not be contained. Even when he put the bions inside a metal box, it still couldn't be contained. If he took the bions out the box, some radiation remained within it. This eventually led Reich to find that metals attracted and reflected the bion radiation, and organic materials attracted but absorbed it partially. Perhaps this knowledge was helped by the reaction of rubber materials in the lab, which seemed to be able to absorb the Sapper radiation particularly well, and he got conjunctivitis in his eye. So he knew that there was a radiation coming from the microscope samples. So by layering the metal and organic materials in a battery-like manner, as in an atomic pile, the radiation could be concentrated within a box from the atmosphere itself without needing the bions as a source. So he discovered that this bion radiation was everywhere to some degree in the environment. Reich states that he discovered the orgone energy in the atmosphere in July 1940, a few months after which the first orgone accumulator, or ORAC, was built and used with mice. See Cancer Biopathy PP 306. The biological radiation, however, was first noted in Oslo in 1939, just before the outbreak of World War II, I think. And the first orgone treatment, although it was not named as such, was using a bion sample in a test tube on a facial wart of Reich's, which he knew contained T. bacilli, or the death bion. This is like a tiny, smaller than a bacteria, and maybe the size of a large virus, and or such a particle or an exosome. This treatment was successful. See Wilhelm Reich, An Evolution of His Work by Boadella, page 154. Small ORAC-type devices were built in Oslo to study this, as then unnamed energy. They had an aperture and lenses through which to observe the flickering radiation. So you can see orgone directly in the right circumstances. The first human ORACs, as known today, were built in the USA, and they had solid metal layering. It was the wire wall layering only came later. All devices which had the battery-like orgone layering will be considered here, whether used medically or with plants, or purely for observing various parameters like temperature or electroscopic discharge rates. Most of the medical and plant studies will therefore be in this section too. So I'm talking in the overview of biophysical orgonomy number 2 there. Right, I'll come back to this document at some point. So basically, you had the bion samples, which were from sea sand that had been cooked, accidentally cooked, and then the radiation off those samples gave him conjunctivitis, and then he knew there was something real coming from those real radiation. And also the bions were a completely new discovery as well. They're halfway between inanimate matter and protos and animate matter, which biology keeps rediscovering and sweeping under the carpet. Like they discovered recently that you can make an artificial cell out of plastic. If you have like little plastic microspheres and you provide some electric current to them, they start behaving like organic life forms. And any matter, what Wright discovered was any matter, if you break it down with very high temperatures in water, it breaks down into these vesicles that are smaller than bacteria and cells and simpler. They just got a plasma, a membrane and pulsation. Perhaps they get DNA later, I'm not sure. But those are halfway between the non-living and the living, and they're pretty tiny, but you can actually see them with light microscopes. If you've got the very, very top end of light microscopes, which Reich had way back in the 1930s. I mean, he was making movies of these things. I think there was an institute in Paris that confirmed that way back in the late 1930s, and it's been confirmed many, many times since then. If you look through overview of biophysical orgonomy number 1, it's got all the bion research, a synopsis of all of it since the late 1930s up until recently. So to jump back to orgone, so it was these bion samples trying to contain them in a metal box that led to orgone accumulators. And metal, the orgone comes in from the environment in softly in waves. It hits the metal, and then it's bounced back. So the outermost metal layer will reflect more orgone back than it can allow to go through, and then the next layer of organic materials will absorb some of it, and then uh, uh, ref, reflect it out again. I think I've got that slightly. I've got my directions a bit mixed up. I'm slightly dyspraxic, but the basically you've got metal, organic, metal, organic, metal, organic, and then metal innermost. And each two layers, a metal and an organic layer, is one, or rather organic and then metal, is one orgone layer. And the least you need in a orgone box is about 3 layers, but preferably up to 6 to 10, even 20-layer orgone accumulators have been built. Reich had a 20-layer one. But because of the different properties of the metal and the organic layer, you get a preferential direction of the orgone from the environment towards the center. And that's how the orgone accumulators work. So this is a metal panel from an orgone acupuncture accumulator. It's from the top of one. So you can see here you've got the steel panel, steel metal, and that would be innermost. And then you got like wood or Cellutex on the outside. And then inside here there's I think 4 double layers of steel wool and sheep's wool. So after this metal layer, the inside of here you'll have a sheep's wool layer next, and then a steel wool, then a sheep's wool, then a steel wool, then a sheep's wool, and then a steel wool, and then this is just the outside covering, which is usually Cellutex on most large accumulators. You can actually see my human-sized orgone accumulator in the kitchen. If I move the camera, there you can see in the corner there that's a human-sized. The brown object is a human-sized orgone accumulator on its side, because I've got lots of further accumulating devices inside it, and the lid is up so that you can see the metal innermost layer. So that's quite a big orgone accumulator, enough for if it was upright, you could sit in it quite comfortably. Right, I have to be careful with my laptop because the battery is gone, and the lead, if the lead comes out, it just flips off because the batteries doesn't go without a wired connection. So this is one of the little orgone accumulating pillows that I keep inside the box to increase the charge. And as you can see, there's some steel wool there. I wanted to get some. I was looking for. I've got a big thing of steel wool. You can usually buy it from DIY shops in sort of round packages that are fairly big. You can, if you want to really go the whole hog, have a look on the internet, and you can get steel wool that's not been treated with oils or any kind of negative oils. But I generally just use stuff that I get from the DIY shop. So that's sheep's wool, and that's wire wool. And I've made this orgone pillow by taking a sheep's wool layer on the bottom, then putting wire wool on the top, and then rolling it up, and that makes a kind of half a dozen layers of sheep's wool and steel wool. And I just put this inside the orgone accumulator. You could use this as a blanket and just put it on your body. So that I'll show you an orgone blanket next. So this is an orgone blanket that was made for me by uh, uh, someone who used to make them, and so you've got a covering there, and then you've got the blanket inside, and you can feel um, one side. Which side is it? Um, yeah, the this this side feels kind of a different texture because the wire wool is on this side, and so inside here there's, I think, half a dozen or at least, so either four orgone layers. I think it's four orgone layers, so that'll actually be 8 layers because each orgone layer is two. It's one layer of wire wool and one layer of sheep's wool, or you could use a woolen blanket or cotton or any organic material. Actually, surprisingly, two of the very best organic material for condensing orgone is actually glass, and the very best metal is gold. So if you really wanted to make the best orgone accumulator possible, well, the Ark of the Covenant in the Bible would be similar because they used a very hard wood, which would be similar to glass. But glass and gold would be an incredibly strong accumulator. That's how the orgone motor was discovered, because glass condenses orgone so well that the condensed orgone moved a Geiger counter ultra fast, and then that made Wright realize that the orgone was turning into a motor function, uh, turning into charged particles, which was, in those days you had a dial on the old orgone, on the old Geiger counters, and a highly orgone charged Geiger counter, the dial just went crazy, and that was how Wright discovered that there was a motor function within orgone. So that's an orgone blanket, and as you can see, that's quite a big one, and this one's got a label on one side, so you know which side to put next to your body, and an orgone blanket like this you could wear for maybe half an hour, or you probably wouldn't want to sleep with it overnight or anything like that, unless you were really undercharged. And then um, there was a guy, the first guy to have a look into orgone and acupuncture was Bernd Senf in the late 1970s in Germany, and he made orgone and messy, but this one's much neater to look at. But if you wanted to make a properly strong orgone tube, it would actually be about this thick, because you need about 300 layers, 300 orgone layers of cling film and tin foil. So you take any kind of tube, metal tube, preferably a steel or iron tube, if you can get hold of it. If not those, then copper, and if not copper, aluminium will do. But actually, aluminium won't do for these types of tubes. If you're using it on your body, you need the higher metals really, and because you've not got any steel in the layering, so you need some steel in the tube itself, because aluminium on its own is a bit negative, or it can be. So you've got on this one. I mean, this is a really weak tube. It's probably only got maybe 20 or 30 layers uh, of of uh, of plastic wrap and tin foil. So you take a steel tube, and then you'd wrap it in cling film, and then you'd wrap it in tin foil and cling film, and repeat that and eventually you'd have the cling film on the outside. This one I've made to with a hole at both ends, so because I want to direct energy along it. But mostly, if you're using it for treatment, you'd have one end closed and one end open, so you can hold it over acupuncture points. Or it'd be very useful for burns and things because you can point it anywhere really quickly, or on the face. On the face, you need to use less time on if you're pointing or directing orgone towards the eyes or the face, because the head has got a much higher charge than the rest of the body, particularly the eyes. So that's the orgone tubes, or sometimes I call them senf acupuncture tubes. We've looked at that. Right, uh, I'm showing you an old sock, but it's not just an old sock. It's actually full of sand that's been boiled and then allowed to cool, and then frozen and then boiled again about half a dozen times, and then I've Oranor charged it, which is the Oranor stands for orgone against nuclear, and it means energized orgone, and you can actually use sand as an orgone device um, by repeatedly boiling and freezing sand. You start to break it down into bions, and then the bions release a radiation which you can use for treatment. There's a guy in New York who uses bion radiation for treatment, and it's quite good in a damp environment because the bion radiation is not hindered by dampness, which the orgone accumulating devices are more affected by damp. Um, yeah, and then lastly, this is a piece of orgonite, which is a resin compound with about 50% metal shavings in, and there might be a few little pieces of crystal in here as well. And these are what people sometimes they bury them by phone masts or in areas of negative energy, and and report effects on the environment. And you can use them for treatment as well. These are Oranor charged orgonite, and you can use them as treatment. Say for toothache, you could lie down and have a piece of orgonite resting on you, and so that's that. Um, right. So in the orgone accumulating studies, if there must be something, I can't remember offhand the number. I think it's around about the region of 150 studies, both in Reich's time and afterwards. And there's all sorts of all sorts of areas covered, like there's ORACs and plant studies, ORACs and cancer studies, physical parameter studies like temperature, water evaporation, Geiger counters, electroscopes. There's controlled mouse studies looking at tumor reaction in cancer mice when they're orgone treated and not. And there's none of that's recent. This is way back in the 70s and 80s when sort of people's attitudes were different towards these things. There's a few non-orgone journal studies. There's one from a journal that's published from Turkey, and there's an interesting one for a very easy to access one. If you look at my overview and find Manion 2023, and which is in Psych Orgone Journal, there's a TV guy called John East, and he had the great idea to get some BBC infrared cameras and go and just take a few capture some video of orgone accumulators, and you can clearly see on the thermal infrared images that there's an energy being accumulated in the device. But have a look through my overview if you're interested in the research background, because there's plenty of it. And that really, oh yeah, talking of research background, I've if you look through the archive of my Substack and go to the very first one, which is labeled an overview of my orgone research. I think I might change it so it doesn't clash with the overviews of biophysical orgonomy. I think I'll change the title to something like a synopsis of my orgone research or something like that. And I've not fully updated it yet, but the link is in there. I've published a PDF on Google Documents. It's about 300,000 words, and it's got all my research since I began in the year 2000. So 26 years of my research. I mean, there's a few articles that I've not included, like just more kind of chatty, informal articles. But every article I thought had something that might be useful in the future, and every key article is in there, and it's all properly indexed and proper sorted into chapters with page numbers this time. My first attempt didn't even have page numbers, but so that's worth going and checking out. What did I call it? A Leon Southgate Collected Writings, Volume 1 to 3, 2020 to 2026, and that's there's a link there to the Google Docs. So feel free to download that and store that on your computer. It might be useful after the apocalypse. So yeah, that's really about it. Was there anything else I thought to mention? Yeah, I mean oh yeah, that was one thing. I'm glad I haven't forgotten that. The orgonite is an orgone compound, and actually Reich did use an orgone compound in one of his researches. He did an experiment called the pendulum experiment, where he had a large metal sphere and a pendulum, and he wanted to see how the pendulum might be attracted and repulsed by the metal sphere. And so he took earth and iron filings and encapsulated it in a glass bulb, and then put cellulose, I think, on the outside. So it was the same principle as the orgonite, but instead of using resin, as in the orgonite, he used earth. But all the principles of orgonite were there. The compression from the outer glass casing, and an orgone accumulating matrix inside. But Reich didn't develop that idea. There's something that I'm going to write about that reminds me of a very strange kind of dimensional experience I had before the conference in 2025, and then it also came up. It kind of spiraled round just before the conference in 2026, and I'll talk about that in the written Substack on the 1st, which I'll try and do a video as well for that. So that's a little bit of a teaser for that one. So I'll talk. I've been meaning to talk about that since the Orgone conference in May and not got round to it. But I've got notes in my phone, so hopefully I'll remember to include it in the next written Substack, and which will have a video accompanying accompaniment, hopefully. So that about covers everything for today. So really, uh, well, if you want to make an orgone device, I mean, you can still buy them. There's Orgonics in the US, ORGONICS.com, which is run by uh, James DeMio's ex-partner, Thierry, and the then I think there's people in Germany who sell them, and of course there's lots of people who sell Orgonite on Etsy. The only thing with Orgonite, if you buy it from someone, you've got to make sure that it's got at least 50% metal particles in it. If it's got less than that, it won't work. And just thinking of the easiest way to use Orgone, I mean the mini cloud buster, where you're just putting a few pipes in a bucket that I call the spirit buster to help with bad dreams, and you can use it just to help with healing as well. That's probably the easiest way to use an Orgone device, and the next easiest, maybe an Orgone pillow like this, because literally that took minutes to make. It's even easier than making an Orgone blanket. The, so just getting one big layer of wire wool and spreading it out thin. You have to be careful with wire wool. It's not the nicest thing to work with. You need to wear a mask and have gloves on, preferably. And you lay the wire wool out and then put sheep's wool or any organic substance on the top, and then roll it up and put it in a plastic bag, and you got like an instant Orgone pillow you can use. The more layers and the bigger the device, the better generally if you want a higher charge, particularly if you live in a damp environment. You need to make a bigger device. If you're in a damp, more northern environment, if you're more towards the equator and it's drier, the Orgone devices work better. So that about covers everything, I think, more or less. And if anyone's got any questions, then just let me know, and I'll try and answer them as best I can. So I look forward to chatting again on the 1st, and bye for now. All best.